got fired by my manager for missing work to help my aunt after a robbery. She said I was overreacting. My boss fired me, standing there, cold as ice, 2 weeks after I'd taken a single day off to help my aunt. I'd just discovered a hidden folder on her computer, files filled with client data, being sold to someone called Silas Solutions. Did I really just lose everything because I chose family over profit? And how deep did this go? Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm still reeling from what happened. I thought I knew my manager, Sarah. I considered her a mentor, almost a friend. But then, one phone call changed everything. My aunt, bless her heart, had been robbed, her home ransacked, and she was terrified. Of course I went to her. I took 1 day off work. 1 day. That's all it took for Sarah to decide I wasn't dedicated enough. But it wasn't just the firing that stung. It was her coldness, her complete lack of empathy. And then I started digging. What I found was more shocking than I could have ever imagined. Get ready, because this is a story of betrayal, stolen secrets, and a fight for justice that I never saw coming. Stay tuned, because you won't believe who was really behind it all. You might even recognize yourself. The fluorescent lights of the office hummed above me, a constant, irritating buzz that mirrored the anxiety clawing at my insides. It had been 2 weeks since the robbery. 2 weeks since I'd held my aunt's trembling hand, helped her pick up the shattered pieces of her life. 2 weeks since I'd called Sarah, my manager, and explained the situation. I'd even offered to work remotely, to do anything to stay on top of my workload. She'd sounded understanding, even sympathetic. Of course, family comes first, she'd said, her voice smooth and reassuring. Take the time you need. Liar. The meeting invitation had appeared on my calendar that morning. Performance review. My stomach dropped. I had a sinking feeling. Now sitting across from Sarah, her face tight and unreadable, and Mr. Davies from HR, who never looked me in the eye, I knew. We've decided to terminate your employment, effective immediately, Mr. Davies droned, reading from a prepared statement. I felt the blood drain from my face. Terminate? Why? My performance reviews have always been excellent. Sarah cleared her throat. We've noticed a recent decline in your dedication. Your absence was poorly timed. We need people who are fully committed to the team. But my aunt, it was an emergency. I even offered to work remotely, I protested, my voice rising. You said you understood. Sarah's eyes hardened. We all have family commitments, but we can't let personal issues affect our work. It was an overreaction. Overreaction? My aunt, robbed, traumatized, alone, and I was overreacting? The rain started, drumming against the office windows like accusing fingers. Mr. Davies pushed a severance package across the table. The numbers swam before my eyes. It wasn't much. Certainly not enough to cover rent, let alone start over. Sign here, he said, pointing to the dotted line. I didn't sign. I stood up, my hands trembling. I deserve an explanation. A real explanation, Sarah sighed, a theatrical, exaggerated sigh. We're moving in a new direction. We need people who are proactive. You simply don't fit our vision anymore. I walked out, the rain mirroring the tears I refused to shed in front of them. How could they do this? How could she do this? That evening, after a restless night fueled by anger and hurt, I decided I wasn't going to let this go. There had to be more to it than just my aunt's robbery. Sarah's reaction was just too calculated, too rehearsed. It felt like she'd been waiting for any excuse. I went back to my aunt's. I found her sitting in her favorite armchair, a blanket wrapped around her, staring blankly at the television. The news droned on about rising crime rates. Are you okay, Aunt Millie? I asked, kneeling beside her. She squeezed my hand. I'm trying to be, darling. It's just unsettling. Everything feels violated. I know, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But we'll get through this, together. I spent anything to keep my mind off the gnawing feeling that I'd been betrayed. One afternoon, while sorting through her mail, I found a strange envelope. It was addressed to her, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a cryptic message. "The package is secure. Confirm receipt." There was no signature. "Aunt Millie, do you know anything about this?" I asked, handing her the note. She frowned, taking the paper. "No, dear, I've never seen this before. How strange." We stared at the note, a cold knot forming in my stomach. What package, and who sent it? Was this related to the robbery? Later that night, after Aunt Millie had gone to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to do some digging. I started with Sarah. I knew her computer password. She'd asked me to fix it once when she'd forgotten it. It felt wrong, I know, but desperation makes you do things you wouldn't normally do. I waited until everyone was gone, the office dark and silent except for the hum of the server room. The rain had stopped, leaving the city gleaming under the streetlights. I slipped my keycard into the lock, the click echoing in the stillness. I navigated to Sarah's computer, my heart pounding in my chest. I typed in the password, and the desktop appeared. I started by checking her email. Nothing obvious. Mostly work-related memos and scheduling confirmations. But then I found it. A folder labeled Personal. Inside were a series of emails to an address I didn't recognize. SilasSolutionsEmail.com. The subject lines were innocuous. Project update, meeting agenda, Q3 projections. But the content was anything but. As I scrolled through the messages, my blood ran cold. They were discussing client data, sensitive information, names, addresses, social security numbers, everything. And Sarah was selling it. One email in particular caught my eye. It was dated the day after my aunt's robbery. The subject line was Emergency Contingency. The email read, Situation resolved. Personnel issue addressed. Data flow secure. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Personnel issue addressed. That was me. She'd used my aunt's robbery as an excuse to fire me, to silence me. But why? What did she think I knew? Or what was she afraid I would find out? I copied the emails to a flash drive, my mind racing. This was bigger than just a firing. This was illegal. This was dangerous. I needed to tell someone, but who could I trust? As I backed out of Sarah's email, I noticed another folder, this one hidden. It was labeled with a single dot, nearly invisible against the dark background. I clicked on it. Inside was a document titled Operation Clean Sweep. The document outlined a plan to systematically extract client data and sell it to Silas Solutions. It detailed the vulnerabilities in the company's security systems and how to exploit them. It listed the names of the key players involved. And there, at the bottom of the list, was a name that made my stomach churn. Mark. Mark was my husband's business associate. They'd been friends for years. They even played golf together every weekend. He was always around, always smiling, always seemingly supportive. Was he involved in this too? I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My manager selling client data. My husband's friend involved in the scheme. My life was crumbling around me. I closed the document, feeling utterly lost. How could I trust anyone anymore? My boss was a criminal, my husband's friend was a traitor, and I was caught in the middle. I went home, feeling like I was walking through treacle. I couldn't tell Mark anything, not yet. I needed to know the full extent of his involvement. I needed proof. I explained the situation, laying out the facts as clearly as I could. The lawyer listened patiently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This is a serious matter," she said when I was finished. "Selling client data is a federal offense, and if your husband's friend is involved, that complicates things even further." "What should I do?" I asked, feeling desperate. "First, don't confront anyone," she advised. "Gather as much evidence as you can. Document everything. And most importantly, protect yourself." I took her advice to heart. I started meticulously documenting everything I knew, creating a timeline of events, gathering evidence from Sarah's emails, and researching Silas Solutions. I found out that Silas Solutions was a shell corporation, registered in the Cayman Islands. It was a front for a data brokerage firm that specialized in selling personal information to the highest bidder. They were known for their aggressive tactics and their willingness to skirt the law. The more I learned, the more scared I became. I was up against some very powerful people, and they weren't going to let me expose them without a fight. One evening, Mark came over for dinner. He was his usual jovial self, cracking jokes and telling stories. He didn't seem to suspect a thing. "How's work going?" he asked as we sat down at the table. "It's complicated," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Complicated how?" he pressed. "Let's just say I'm dealing with some unethical behavior," I said, watching his reaction closely. He frowned. "What kind of unethical behavior?" I hesitated. "I can't say, but I'm trying to do the right thing." He looked at me intently, his eyes narrowed. "Be careful," he said. "Sometimes doing the right thing can have unintended consequences." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Was that a threat or a warning? After dinner, while Mark was helping me clear the table, I saw his phone light up. A text message appeared on the screen. It was from Sarah. The message read, "Meeting tomorrow still on. Need to discuss the loose end." Loose end? Was that me? I excused myself, my heart pounding in my chest. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and took a deep breath. I needed to calm down. I needed to think. I couldn't trust Mark, not anymore. He was clearly involved. And he knew that I was onto them. I decided to install a hidden camera in our living room. It was a small, discreet device that looked like a smoke detector. I wanted to record their conversations, to gather evidence of their conspiracy. The rate, but inside, I was a bundle of nerves. I kept replaying Mark's text message in my head. Need to discuss the loose end. That afternoon, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said. "We know what you're doing," a voice said on the other end. It was deep and menacing. "We suggest you stop. For your own safety." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling. They knew. They were watching me. I called the police. I explained the situation, telling them about the stolen data, the shell corporation, and the threats. They took my statement, but they seemed skeptical. "We need more evidence," the officer said. "A threat is not enough." I felt like I was running out of time. They were closing in, and I was on my own. That evening, I checked the footage from the hidden camera. I couldn't believe what I saw. Mark and Sarah were sitting on the couch, talking in hushed tones. "She knows too much," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "We need to shut her down." "I know," Mark said. "But how? We can't just make her disappear." "We need to find a way to discredit her," Sarah said. "Make her look unstable, unreliable." "I have an idea," Mark said, a sinister smile spreading across his face. I watched in horror as they plotted to destroy my life. They were going to frame me, to make me look like I was crazy. I felt a surge of anger, a burning desire for revenge. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I was going to expose them, no matter the cost. I started by contacting a local journalist. I told her everything I knew, providing her with the emails, the documents, and the video footage. She was skeptical at first, but after reviewing the evidence, she agreed to investigate. The journalist, a seasoned professional named Emily Carter, started digging into Silas Solutions and Sarah's activities. She uncovered a network of corruption that reached far beyond our small office. She found evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and even bribery. Sarah and her associates were involved in a web of illegal activities. Emily published her story on the front page of the local newspaper. It was a bombshell. The story went viral, sparking outrage and outrage. The police launched a full-scale investigation. Sarah and Mark were arrested, along with several other key players in the conspiracy. The company was shut down, Silas Solutions was exposed as a fraud. The stolen data was recovered. I testified at the trial. I told my story, laying bare the truth about Sarah's betrayal and Mark's involvement. They were found guilty on all counts. Sarah was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Mark received a 5-year sentence. Justice had been served. But the victory felt hollow. I had lost my job, my friends, and my trust in humanity. I was starting over from scratch. I found a new job at a smaller company, one that valued integrity and honesty. I made new friends, people who I could trust. But the scars of betrayal remained. I was always wary, always suspicious. It took me a long time to learn to trust again. One day, Aunt Millie came to visit me. She was doing much better. She'd even started taking art classes. "You know," she said, "what happened to you was terrible, but you handled it with such strength and grace. I'm so proud of you." Her words touched me deeply. I realized that I had come out of this experience stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever. I had a choice to make. I could hold on to the anger and resentment, letting it consume me. Or I could forgive them, move on, and rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. But I knew that forgiveness was the only way to truly heal. I decided to write Sarah a letter. I told her that I forgave her. I told her that I hoped she would find redemption. I never received a response. But I knew that I had done the right thing. I started volunteering at a local charity, helping victims of crime. I found purpose and meaning in helping others. I realized that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Today, I am a successful businesswoman, a loving aunt, and a respected member of my community. I have built a life that I am proud of. And while the memory of Sarah's betrayal still stings, I refuse to let it define me. I have learned from my mistakes. I have grown from my experiences. And I have emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have sought revenge or chosen forgiveness? Could you have forgiven them? If you've ever experienced workplace betrayal, share your story in the comments below. Let's support each other and learn from each other's experiences. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories of courage and resilience. Sarah, my manager, used the opportunity to fire me, masking a larger scheme involving client data, and Mark, my husband's business associate. Exposing their actions wasn't easy. It came with personal threats, police skepticism, and the heartbreaking realization that those closest to me were capable of such deceit. I've had to completely rebuild my life, not just professionally, but emotionally. For a long time, I battled with anger and resentment, emotions I'm sure you can understand if you've ever been in a similar situation. It was the support of my aunt, and the realization that holding on to hate would only continue to poison my life that ultimately led me to choose a path of forgiveness, not because they deserved it, but because I did. Ultimately, I found peace by focusing on helping others and building a life based on integrity and honesty. What started as a devastating loss has become a testament to my resilience. It taught me invaluable lessons about trust, betrayal, and the importance of choosing compassion over vengeance. It reminds me that even after everything I've lost, I can come out stronger, and you can too. Now I'm on a mission to help others who have been through a similar situation to come out stronger too. Now I'm starting a nonprofit helping people deal with the pain of workplace betrayal. What would you do? What choice would you make? Tell me what you'd choose. And please like, subscribe, and comment. It wasn't long after the trial that I stumbled upon something completely unexpected, something that made me question everything all over again. I was helping Aunt Millie organize her belongings, still a long process after the robbery. We were going through some old photo albums, reminiscing about happier times, when she pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring, one I'd never seen her wear. "Where did this come from?" I asked. My curiosity piqued. Aunt Millie hesitated, her face clouding over. It was a gift," she said softly, "from someone special. Who? I pressed gently. She sighed. His name was Arthur. We were close a long time ago, before your uncle. And why haven't you ever worn it? I asked. It just reminds me of things, she said, her voice trailing off. Things I'd rather forget. Later that evening, after Aunt Millie had gone to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. I did a little digging online. I searched for Arthur and Aunt Millie and her maiden name. And then I found it. An old newspaper article, dated several decades ago. The headline read, "Local businessman indicted on embezzlement charges." The article detailed a case of fraud and corruption involving a prominent businessman named Arthur Sterling. And guess who was listed as a key witness? My Aunt Millie. According to the article, Arthur Sterling had been stealing money from his company, and Aunt Millie had been the one to blow the whistle on him. He'd been arrested and charged, but the case had mysteriously collapsed, and he'd walked free. I stared at the article in disbelief. Could this be connected to what happened to me? Could Sarah and Mark have been working for Arthur Sterling, seeking revenge on Aunt Millie for what she'd done all those years ago? The thought was crazy, I know, but it was the only explanation that made any sense. I decided to confront Aunt Millie. I showed her the article, and she burst into tears. "I didn't want you to know," she sobbed. "I didn't want to drag you into this." She explained that Arthur Sterling had threatened her and her family if she testified against him. She'd been living in fear ever since. I held her close, trying to comfort her. "It's okay," I said. "It's over now. We'll protect you." But the truth was, I was terrified. If Arthur Sterling was still out there, and if he was still seeking revenge, we were both in danger. I hired a private investigator to look into Arthur Sterling's current whereabouts. It turned out that he was living in a retirement community, just a few hours away. He was old, frail, and in poor health. But that didn't mean he wasn't still dangerous. I decided to pay him a visit. I drove to the retirement community, my heart pounding in my chest. I found Arthur Sterling sitting in a wheelchair on the patio, surrounded by other elderly residents. He was a shadow of his former self, his face lined and his eyes hollow. I approached him cautiously. "Mr. Sterling," I asked. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" he rasped. "My name is—" I paused. "It doesn't matter. I'm related to Millie." His eyes widened, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. "Millie?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you want?" "I know what you did," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I know about the embezzlement. I know about the threats. I know about everything," he chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "So what? What are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to make sure you pay for what you did," I said. "I'm going to expose you. I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." He just laughed again. "It's too late," he said. "I'm an old man. I don't have anything left to lose." I stared at him, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. He was right. He was a broken old man, consumed by bitterness and regret. What could I possibly do to him that life hadn't already done? I turned and walked away. I realized that revenge wasn't the answer. It wouldn't bring back what I had lost. It wouldn't heal the wounds of the past. The only way to move forward was to let go of the anger and embrace the future. As I drove away from the retirement community, I made a decision. I was going to dedicate my life to helping others, to fighting injustice, and to making the world a better place. I was going to use my experiences to empower others, to inspire hope, and to create change. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for the challenge. I went back to my attorney to see about how to proceed. She explained what she saw as my options. I looked at her. "Can he be charged with anything?" She looked down at her notes. "Not after this long. The statute of limitations has run out on pretty much everything." I rubbed my temples. "So he gets away with everything," she sighed. "I'm afraid so. I had to face it head on. I couldn't let this destroy me. That's when I decided to go back to school, get a degree in business ethics. I knew I could take my experiences and learn from them, and use that knowledge to help others avoid the problems I had faced. I could be a force for good. As I went back to school, I also looked to reconcile with my husband. I know that seems weird, right? He betrayed me, but he was manipulated. He'd lost everything too. We went to counseling. It was difficult, but ultimately, we both wanted to make it work. What would you do? After a couple of years, I got my degree. I started speaking at conferences and seminars, sharing my story, and offering guidance to companies on how to create ethical workplaces. I became an advocate for whistleblowers, helping them navigate the legal and ethical challenges of reporting wrongdoing. And I even started my own consulting firm, specializing in corporate ethics and compliance. We are living our best lives. It took hard work, but we are doing it. It wasn't easy. There were times when I wanted to give up, when I felt like the world was against me. But I kept going. I kept fighting. I kept believing in myself. And in the end, I succeeded. How would you keep going? If you were betrayed, could you reconcile? It wasn't always smooth sailing, you know. There were times when my past came back to haunt me. Once, I was giving a presentation at a large corporate conference, talking about the importance of ethical leadership, when a man stood up in the audience and started shouting. "You're a fraud," he yelled. "You're a liar. You're just trying to make money off your own misfortune." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I recognized him. He was one of Sarah's former colleagues, a man who had been deeply involved in the data theft scheme. He was clearly still loyal to her. "You destroyed her life," he shouted. "You ruined her career. You're nothing but a vengeful, bitter woman." The audience was silent, staring at me with a mixture of shock and curiosity. I could feel my face flushing with anger and embarrassment. But then, something amazing happened. A woman in the audience stood up and started clapping. And then another. And another. Soon the entire room was applauding, drowning out the man's shouts. He stormed out of the conference hall, red-faced and defeated. I stood there, tears welling up in my eyes. I realized that I wasn't alone. There were people who believed in me, who supported me, who admired me for what I had overcome. That moment gave me the strength to keep going, to keep fighting for what I believed in. Another time, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell my story. He wanted to make a film about the data theft scandal, about Sarah's betrayal, and about my journey to redemption. I was hesitant at first. I didn't want to relive the pain of the past. I didn't want to expose myself to further scrutiny and criticism. But then I realized that this was an opportunity to reach a wider audience, to educate more people about the dangers of corporate corruption, and to inspire others to stand up for what is right. So I agreed to participate in the documentary. The filming process was intense and emotional. I spent hours talking about my experiences, reliving the trauma of the betrayal, and confronting the pain of the past. But it was also incredibly cathartic. It helped me to process my emotions, to heal my wounds, and to move on with my life. The documentary was released to critical acclaim. It won several awards and was screened at film festivals around the world. It generated a lot of buzz and sparked a national conversation about corporate ethics and accountability. I was invited to appear on television and radio shows, to share my story, and to discuss the issues raised in the film. I became a spokesperson for ethical business practices, advocating for stronger regulations and greater transparency. But the most rewarding part of the experience was the feedback I received from viewers. People wrote to me from all over the world, sharing their own stories of betrayal and injustice. They told me that my story had given them hope, that it had inspired them to fight for what they believed in, and that it had empowered them to create positive change in their own lives. That was when I realized that my pain had a purpose, that my suffering had not been in vain, that my experiences had given me a unique opportunity to make a difference in the world. I often wonder what Sarah is doing now. Has she changed? Does she regret what she did? I guess I'll never really know. Do you think people can truly change? I sometimes visit Aunt Millie. She is getting older. It makes me sad, but she is still strong. She has seen it all. Would you have visited your aunt? I had an opportunity to meet someone from Silas Solutions. He contacted me out of the blue. He wanted to meet for coffee. I was hesitant, but I agreed. I met him at a small cafe. He looked nervous. He began to explain how he had been hired by Sarah. He didn't know what the company was really doing. When he found out, he quit. He wanted to apologize. I listened. He seemed sincere. It was hard to forgive him. He hadn't done anything directly to me, but he had been a part of the problem. I told him that I appreciated his apology. I told him that I hoped he had learned from his mistakes. Can you forgive people who were just following orders? We left it at that. He left. I never saw him again. That's my story. A story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimately, redemption. It's a story that I hope will inspire you to never give up, to never lose hope, and to always believe in the power of good to overcome evil. What lessons will you take away from my experiences? How has my story made you reflect on your own life? It makes me wonder, if I saw Sarah again, what would I do? It's a thought that still crosses my mind from time to time. I've learned to make peace with my past, but forgetting it is not an option. I started to teach a class on ethics at the local community college. It was a small class, maybe 15 students, but they were eager to learn. I shared my story with them, and they were shocked. They couldn't believe that something like that could happen, but I told them, it does happen. It happens every day. People make bad choices. They prioritize money over ethics. They betray their colleagues and friends, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can create a more ethical world. We can hold people accountable for their actions. We can promote integrity and transparency. One of my students, a young woman named Maria, was particularly interested in my story. She came to my office after class one day and asked if she could interview me for a school project. I agreed. During the interview, Maria asked me a lot of tough questions. She wanted to know about the details of the data theft scheme. She wanted to know about Sarah's motivations. She wanted to know about the impact of the betrayal on my life. I answered her questions honestly and openly. I didn't hold anything back. I wanted her to understand the full extent of the damage that had been done. At the end of the interview, Maria asked me one final question. Do you think Sarah is a bad person? I thought about that for a moment. It was a difficult question. I had spent so much time hating Sarah, blaming her for everything that had happened to me. But I realized that hating her was only hurting me. It was keeping me stuck in the past. So I told Maria the truth. I don't know if Sarah is a bad person, I said, but I know that she made bad choices, and those choices had devastating consequences. Maria nodded. Thank you, she said. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Maria's project was a huge success. She presented it to the class, and everyone was moved by her story. They were impressed by my honesty and my willingness to share my experiences. After Maria graduated, she went on to become a lawyer. She dedicated her career to fighting for justice and protecting the rights of others. I was so proud of her. She was a true inspiration. She showed me that even in the face of adversity, it is possible to make a positive difference in the world.